The stars looked cold and dead from the bridge of the Nemesis. Captain Jack Stone stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face lit by the glow of distant suns. The ship drifted through the empty border space, far from any civilized system. That was how Jack liked it. Humanity had been pushed to the edges of the galaxy long ago, quarantined by races who feared them. They called humans unpredictable, violent, dangerous. Jack never argued with them. They were right. The message alert broke the silence on the bridge. Jack nodded to his communications officer, who opened the channel. The hologram that appeared showed a thin, blue-skinned alien with large, worried eyes, a member of the Astra Confederation, a peaceful alliance that spanned 3 star systems near the galactic core. "This is a desperate call to any who can hear," the alien said, voice trembling. "The Void Swarm has entered our territory. 2 colony worlds already lost. Billions dead. Our defenses fail. We beg for aid." The bridge crew exchanged glances. The Void Swarm was not unknown to them, a massive hive of insect-like creatures that moved through space like a living flood, consuming everything in their path. Most species avoided them. None fought them directly. "They're asking for help from anyone," said Mira, Jack's second-in-command. Her scarred face showed no emotion. "Even us." Jack's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. How desperate they must be to call upon the monsters. For centuries, the galactic community had treated humans as dangerous primitives, too violent to join their peaceful societies. Human ships were turned away from most ports. Human colonies were limited to the harsh outer worlds no one else wanted. The quarantine had been in place so long that most humans had stopped trying to break it. "Should I ignore it, Captain?" asked the communications officer. Jack considered for a moment. "No, tell them we're coming. And tell them our help has a price." 3 days later, the Nemesis docked at an Astran space station. Jack brought only a small team. Mira, his tactical expert; Lisa, a woman who knew more about explosives than most people knew about breathing; Ren, a former pirate with a gift for psychological warfare; and Tom, whose friendly smile hid the mind of a man who had once crashed an entire planetary stock market for fun. The Astrans who greeted them were clearly afraid. Their blue skin seemed pale, their large eyes darting nervously. The leader stepped forward, introducing himself as Trell. We thank you for answering our call," said Trell, trying to hide his discomfort. "Many others ignored us." "Others don't want to face the swarm," Jack said flatly. "We're not afraid." Trell led them to a meeting room where other Astran officials waited. Maps and projections showed the swarm's progress through their territory. Another colony was under attack even now. "Our people are peaceful," Trell explained. "We have defensive technology, but nothing that truly stops them. They simply consume, adapt, continue." Jack studied the maps while Lisa and Ren whispered to each other, occasionally laughing at something that made the Astrans shift uncomfortably. "You need more than defense," Jack finally said. "You need offense. You need to hit them so hard they learn to fear you." An older Astran stood up, his face showing disgust. "That is not our way. We value all life." "Then you will die valuing the lives of those killing you," Mira said coldly. Jack held up his hand for silence. "Here are our terms. Complete tactical control. No questions about our methods. 1/4 of your rare mineral reserves as payment." The room erupted in protest. Jack waited, unmoved, until they quieted. "Those are impossible demands," Trell exclaimed. "Then find someone else to save you." Jack turned to leave, signaling his crew. As they reached the door, a message came through. The 3rd colony had fallen. Billions more dead. The Astrans looked at each other in despair. "Wait," called Trell. We accept your terms." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "I'll need a list of all available ships, weapons, and resources. And I need crew. Humans." "Humans? Where would we find more humans?" Jack's smile was not kind. "I know where they are. The ones you fear most. The ones you call ruthless and dangerous. I'll call them, and they'll come. As the Astrans left to prepare, an elder approached Jack quietly. You know what they say about humans. The elder whispered, that in your history, you nearly destroyed yourselves many times with your violence. Jack looked at the elder with steady eyes. Yes, and that's exactly why we're your only hope. We've stared into our own extinction and fought back. We know what it takes to survive. Within a day, Jack's message had spread through the hidden channels that connected the scattered human settlements. Former soldiers, engineers, scientists, even criminals, all with one thing in common, a ruthless will to win at any cost. They began arriving in small ships, grim-faced men and women answering the call not for the Astrans, but for the payment and the chance to fight. The Astrans watched in growing unease as more humans arrived. They had invited saviors, but looking at the cold eyes and battle-scarred faces of their new allies, many wondered if they had instead invited an even worse fate than the swarm. Trell had never seen so many humans in one place. They filled the main hangar of the space station, checking weapons, talking in low voices, studying maps of Astran territory. What struck him most was how different they looked from one another. Some tall, some short, skin in various shades, hair of different colors. Yet they all shared the same hard look in their eyes. The look of predators. Are these really the best you could find? Trell asked Jack, trying to keep his voice steady. They look like criminals. Jack's face remained neutral. Some are. That one there, he pointed to a woman with short white hair inspecting explosives, is Lisa. Blew up a moon base with 3,000 people on it because they wouldn't pay protection money. Trell felt sick. And you trust her? I trust her to do what she does best, Jack said. Same as all of them. Marcus walked over, a slim man with calculating eyes that seemed to see through everything. He had been a military strategist before being discharged for sacrificing a civilian transport to win a battle. The Astrans have good ships but terrible weapons, Marcus said without greeting. And their pilots avoid taking any risks. We don't believe in sacrificing lives needlessly, Trell defended. Marcus looked at him coldly. Which is why you're losing. More humans arrived throughout the day. Ren brought his own crew of former pirates who specialized in psychological warfare. Tom set up a command center where he analyzed swarm movement patterns. A tall woman named Kate, who had once been banned from 3 systems for excessive force as a security contractor, took charge of training the Astran defense teams. The Astran leaders held an emergency meeting as reports came in of the swarm approaching another colony. Many wanted to send the humans away, disturbed by their presence and methods. They talk about using our outer colonies as bait, one official complained. As if those lives don't matter. Would you rather lose all the colonies? Asked another. The debate was interrupted when Jack and his officers entered without invitation. Jack threw a data pad on the table, showing new projections of the swarm's advance. While you talk, they move, he said. You have 12 hours before they reach your 4th colony. We need to leave now if we're going to beat them there. We haven't finished our deliberations, protested the head official. Jack leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Then finish them. But understand this. Our deal includes complete tactical freedom. If you can't accept that, we walk away now, and you die. The room fell silent. Then an elder Astran stood slowly, her movements stiff with age. I remember the quarantine order against humans, she said. I was young then. They told us humans were too unpredictable, too willing to use violence, to be allowed free movement among peaceful species. She looked around the room. Now we need exactly those qualities. We face extinction. Our peaceful ways have failed us. One by one, the officials nodded, some reluctantly. Trell was assigned as liaison to the human forces, a role he accepted with mixed feelings. As the humans prepared their ships, Trell watched workers loading what looked like modified mining charges onto the Nemesis. What are those for? He asked Lisa, who supervised the loading. "Creative problem solving," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later, Trell found Jack on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "Your people are afraid of us," Jack said without turning. "Can you blame them?" Trell asked. "Your reputation." "Our reputation is exactly why you called us." Jack cut him off. "Deep down, you knew peaceful methods wouldn't work." Trell couldn't deny it. The elder was right. "We need your approach. But at what cost to our civilization? To who we are?" Jack finally turned to face him. Survival first, philosophy later. As they boarded their ships, the elder approached Jack one last time. "You know," she said quietly, "there is an old saying among our people. Be careful when fighting monsters, lest you become one. I fear we have invited monsters to save us from monsters." Jack looked at her for a long moment before answering. "The difference is, your monsters want to destroy you. We just want to be paid." He paused. "And maybe prove that the galaxy was wrong to lock us away." The fleet departed, 20 human ships leading 100 Astran vessels toward the colony under threat. As they entered warp, Trell couldn't help but wonder if they had made a terrible mistake, or their only possible choice. The fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Villa system. The fourth Astran colony lay ahead, a blue-green world with 3 moons. From this distance, it looked peaceful, but the scanners told a different story. "Swarm ships detected," reported Tom from his station. "Hundreds of them, already in the outer atmosphere." On the main screen, they could see them now. Dark, irregular shapes moving like a cloud of insects around the planet. The Astran commanders on other ships began sending frantic messages. "We're too late," one cried. "The colony is already under attack." Trell watched Jack's face for some reaction, but the human captain showed nothing. Instead, he turned to Marcus. Analysis. Marcus studied the data flowing across his screen. The swarm moves in waves. They send smaller units first to test defenses, then follow with larger groups that adapt to whatever they encountered. "Can we break through to evacuate the colonists?" Trell asked desperately. "No," Jack said flatly, "but we can learn." He ordered the fleet to hold position outside the swarm's sensor range. For the next hour, they watched in silence as the swarm descended on the colony. The Astran commanders were horrified, many unable to keep watching, but the humans observed carefully, recording everything. "They're feeding," Lisa said, pointing to data patterns, "converting biomass to energy and new drones." "And look here," added Wren. "When Astran defense towers fire, the swarm shifts to avoid similar areas." They learned fast. Finally, Jack ordered a small scout ship to approach the edge of the swarm. The Astrans protested, but fell silent when Jack explained no one would be aboard. It would be remote-controlled. The scout ship carried sensors and a single modified mining charge. As it approached the outer swarm vessels, Lisa activated the charge. It didn't explode. Instead, it released a burst of energy at a specific frequency. The effect was immediate. The nearby swarm ships spun in confusion, some colliding with each other. "It works," Marcus said, a rare smile crossing his face. "The frequency disrupts their communication network." "For how long?" Jack asked. "Not long enough," Lisa replied as the swarm ships quickly reorganized. "But it's a start." Jack ordered a full retreat before the swarm could track them. Back in safe space, the humans gathered to plan while the Astrans mourned another lost colony. "The good news," Lisa explained at the strategy meeting, "is that the swarm operates on a high frequency. Disrupt it, and they get confused. The bad news," added Marcus, "is that they adapt quickly. The same trick won't work twice." Jack pointed to the map showing the swarm's projected path. "They'll hit this outpost next," he said, indicating a small mining facility. "It's not heavily populated." "We need to evacuate everyone immediately," Trell insisted. "No," Jack said. "We need to use it as bait." The room went silent. Trell stared at Jack in disbelief. You want to sacrifice our people? Absolutely not. Jack's eyes were cold. Evacuate your people, yes. But make it look like they're still there. We need the swarm to come in close, thinking they've found an easy target. Lisa smiled darkly. And then we hit them with everything we've got. The plan came together quickly. The mining outpost was evacuated, but life support systems were left running. Automated messages continued broadcasting. And throughout the facility, Lisa's team planted modified versions of the frequency devices. When they were done, Jack gathered the fleet in the next system. The Astran ships would form a defensive line, while the more maneuverable human vessels would dart in for attack runs. This is wrong, an Astran commander protested, using our own colony as a trap. Would you rather lose another billion people? Marcus asked coldly. They waited. Hours passed. Then the sensors lit up. The swarm had arrived at the mining outpost. They surrounded it, began to land on it, breaking through outer defenses easily. Now, Jack ordered. Lisa activated the devices remotely. Throughout the mining facility, powerful transmitters began broadcasting the destruction frequency, but in a complex pattern that shifted constantly. The swarm ships nearest the outpost began spinning wildly, crashing into each other. All ships, attack pattern Alpha, Jack commanded. The human vessels shot forward, weapons blazing. They targeted the confused swarm ships first, destroying dozens before they could recover. The Astran vessels followed more cautiously, providing covering fire. For the first time since the invasion began, swarm ships were falling faster than they could be replaced. For the first time, the Astrans saw hope. Then something unexpected happened. The largest swarm ship, a massive hive carrier at the center of the formation, suddenly changed course. Instead of continuing its attack on the outpost, it turned and accelerated directly toward the human fleet. They're targeting us specifically, Marcus said, surprised. They've identified us as the greater threat. Jack watched the approaching ship, and for the first time, Trell saw a genuine smile on the human's face. Good, Jack said. Now they're learning to fear us. The next 2 weeks saw the human tactics grow increasingly brutal. After their first success, Jack's fleet didn't wait for the swarm to attack. They began hitting swarm gathering points before they could organize into larger attack groups. Lisa developed what she called dead zones, areas flooded with radiation that killed all plant life, but slowed the swarm's ability to communicate. The Astrans were horrified at the destruction of their ecosystems, but couldn't argue with the results. The swarm struggled to move through these areas. The radiation will fade in a few years, Lisa told the protesting Astran scientists. Your people will be extinct in a few months if we don't act. Marcus designed traps using damaged ships as bait. When swarm vessels moved in to consume the resources, hidden explosives would detonate, taking out dozens at once. The humans had started calling it pest control, a term that made the Astrans uncomfortable. But the most disturbing development came from Tom and his research team. They had captured a small swarm drone and were studying it in a secure lab aboard the Nemesis. The swarm operates on a biological network, Tom explained to Jack and Trell. Each drone is like a cell in a body, controlled by chemical and electrical signals. And? Jack asked. Tom smiled. And we can hijack those signals, turn their own drones against them. He demonstrated by activating a device that sent out specific frequencies. The captured drone began attacking the containment field, trying to break free. Now watch this. Tom adjusted the signal, and the drone suddenly went still. We can make them stop attacking, Trell asked hopefully. Better, Tom said. We can make them attack each other. The plan was put into action at a large swarm gathering point near an abandoned Astran colony. Special drones were sent in, broadcasting Tom's signal. Soon, swarm ships were firing on each other, creating chaos in their ranks. But the most controversial moment came when Jack ordered the use of refugee ships as decoys. 3 vessels filled with Astran civilians had been trying to escape the war zone when they were surrounded by swarm scouts. Instead of rushing to rescue them, Jack saw an opportunity. "We can use them to draw in the main swarm fleet," he told the Astran commanders. "Then hit them with everything we have." "Those are civilian ships," an Astran admiral protested, "with thousands of our people aboard. And millions more will die if we don't stop the swarm here," Marcus replied coldly. Trell looked at Jack's face, searching for some sign of doubt or regret. He found none. The plan worked. The swarm converged on the refugee ships, and the combined human Astran fleet struck from 3 directions at once. Lysa's disruption devices, now more powerful than before, threw the swarm into confusion long enough for the attack to succeed. The refugee ships suffered heavy damage, but most made it to safety. After the battle, Trell found Jack alone on the Nemesis bridge. "We saved most of the refugees," Jack said before Trell could speak. "That's more than would have survived without our plan." "Your methods," Trell began, "are keeping your species alive," Jack finished. The next target was an abandoned Astran colony that the swarm was using as a staging area. The colony contained ancient buildings and artifacts important to Astran culture. Lysa proposed detonating charges beneath the surface, collapsing the entire colony site and crushing the swarm forces. The Astran officials were outraged. "Those ruins are sacred," one shouted. "They contain our history, our art." "You can rebuild monuments," Lysa said with a shrug. "You can't rebuild extinct species." When the Astrans continued to protest, Marcus stepped forward. "Sentiment is a luxury," he said, his voice like ice, "one you cannot afford right now." In the end, they watched from orbit as Lysa's charges turned the ancient colony into rubble, destroying thousands of swarm ships in the process. The Astrans were silent, many weeping quietly. Aboard the Nemesis, Ren made a discovery that gave them hope. The frequencies that disrupted swarm communication seemed to cause them pain. "They're not just confused when we broadcast," he explained. "They're suffering. It's the first weakness we've found that they can't simply adapt around." Jack nodded. "Focus all research on that. Find me a way to hurt them permanently." As the war continued, the Astrans noticed something changing within themselves. Their horror at human methods was being replaced by a cold calculation of results. Some began suggesting tactics almost as brutal as the humans proposed. Trell mentioned this to Jack, who nodded without surprise. "You're learning what we've always known," he said. "When facing extinction, morality is a secondary concern." "Is this what it means to be human?" Trell asked. "To become so ruthless?" Jack looked at him with those cold eyes. "No, being human means being able to be ruthless when necessary, and then choosing not to be when the threat is gone." He turned back to the view screen showing the stars. "The question is whether your people can learn the same balance." A month passed. The combined human Astran forces had pushed the swarm back from the core systems, but at a terrible cost. Half the Astran worlds lay in ruins. Millions of civilians were dead. Those who survived huddled in crowded refugee centers, their once beautiful cities reduced to ash and rubble. On the Nemesis bridge, Jack studied the latest reports. The swarm had changed tactics, concentrating their forces rather than spreading out. They were gathering around a single planet in the Astran home system. "Why there?" Jack wondered aloud. "It's not strategically important." Trell's face went pale as he saw the planet highlighted on the map. "That's Astria Prime," he whispered. "Our oldest colony. It holds the Genesis chamber." "What's that?" Lysa asked, looking up from her weapon designs. "It contains the original genetic material of our species," Trell explained. "Seeds, embryos, DNA samples, everything we would need to rebuild if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus nodded with understanding. "If you faced extinction, it's your backup plan." The Astran leaders were summoned immediately. Fear filled their faces as they realized what was happening. The swarm must have detected the biological complexity, Tom suggested. All that genetic material in one place would attract them like a beacon. We must protect it at all costs, declared the Astran High Commander. Everything our species is, everything we could be, is preserved there. Jack was silent for a moment, his eyes moving between the map and the desperate faces of the Astrans. Then he spoke words that froze the room. We need to use it as bait. The chaos was immediate. Astrans shouted in protest, some lunging toward Jack only to be blocked by the other humans. Trell stepped between them, hands raised for calm. You can't be serious, he said to Jack. This isn't some outpost or abandoned colony. This is our very essence. Which is exactly why the swarm wants it, Jack replied, unmoved by the outrage around him, and why it's the perfect trap. He explained his plan. They would set up the most powerful version of Lisa's disruption devices around the Genesis chamber. When the main swarm force converged on it, they would activate the devices, causing maximum confusion. Then the fleet would strike with everything they had. And if your plan fails? Asked the High Commander, voice shaking with emotion. If the swarm destroys the chamber, then you'll have to rebuild your civilization the hard way, Jack said. But you'll be alive to do it. For the first time since the humans arrived, the Astrans flatly refused. The Genesis chamber was too precious. They would find another way. Jack warned them there was no other way, but they wouldn't listen. That night, a group of Astran soldiers attempted to seize control of the Nemesis. They believed if they could force the humans to leave, they could negotiate with the swarm or find a less risky solution. The attempt failed quickly. No Astrans were killed, but several were injured. In the tense aftermath, Jack called a meeting with the Astran leadership. The mood was dark, trust broken on both sides. You don't understand what you're asking of us, said the elder who had initially supported the humans. That chamber isn't just a collection of samples. It's our past and our future. I understand perfectly, Jack replied. But you need to understand something too. The swarm doesn't care about your heritage or your future. It sees the chamber as food, nothing more. He pulled up a new set of scans on the display. Look at the swarm's movement. They're already surrounding Astria Prime. The Genesis chamber will be gone in days, whether we use it as bait or not. The room fell silent as the Astrans studied the data. It was true. The swarm had changed course, converging on their most sacred site with single-minded purpose. How did they know? Whispered Trell. How did they know exactly where to hit us hardest? Because they're not mindless insects, Jack said. They're predators, and predators instinctively go for the throat. The High Commander stood slowly, looking older than ever before. If we agree to your plan, what are our chances? Honestly, Jack looked him in the eye. Maybe 50%, but without it, 0. The commander nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Then we have no choice. As the Astrans filed out to prepare, the elder approached Jack one last time. If your plan succeeds, will there be anything left of the chamber? She asked quietly. Jack didn't offer false hope. I don't know. But if it fails, there won't be anything left of your people. The fleet mobilized, every ship and weapon they had remaining. The Astrans looked at their human allies with new eyes, not with fear or disgust, but with the grim recognition that survival sometimes required terrible choices. As they approached Astria Prime, Jack gave his final orders. No hesitation, no mercy. Hit them with everything, and don't stop until they're dust. Trell took his position beside Jack on the bridge. After this, he said softly, if we survive, my people will never be the same. Jack nodded. That's the price of facing extinction. You either change, or you disappear. The fleet arrived at Astria Prime to find the swarm already there in massive numbers. Dark ships filled the space around the planet like a cloud of insects, more than they had ever seen in one place. There must be millions of them, whispered an Astran officer. Jack studied the tactical display, then nodded to Lisa. Deploy the devices. Under cover of stealth technology, small drones carried Lisa's disruption devices to key points around the Genesis chamber. The massive structure sat in a mountain valley, its white dome gleaming in the planet's sunlight. Swarm ships circled it hungrily, but had not yet breached its defenses. The chamber's shields are holding for now, reported Tom. But they're already weakening. All ships in position, Marcus confirmed. The Astran fleet is behind the moon, ready to move on your command. Jack looked at Trell. Last chance to back out. Trell shook his head. We stick to the plan. Jack gave the order. The disruption devices activated simultaneously, broadcasting the frequency that caused the swarm pain. The effect was immediate and more dramatic than they had expected. The swarm ships nearest the devices spun wildly, some crashing into the planet's surface, others into each other. It's working, Lisa exclaimed, watching the chaos spread through the swarm ranks. They're disoriented. Fleet, attack pattern Omega, Jack commanded. Hit them now. The human ships swooped in, weapons blazing. The Astran fleet emerged from behind the moon, adding their firepower to the assault. For the first time, the swarm was on the defensive, unable to organize a counterattack as the painful frequencies scrambled their collective consciousness. But their advantage didn't last long. The largest swarm ships moved to protect the smaller ones, forming a shield that somehow blocked the frequency. They're adapting again, Marcus warned. The effect is weakening. Jack had expected this. Launch Phase 2. Tom activated a new weapon system, one they had developed in secret. It fired projectiles that appeared harmless, small, almost invisible capsules that penetrated the swarm ships easily. But once inside, they released a modified virus, specifically designed to target the swarm's DNA. Biological weapon deployed, Tom reported calmly. Trell looked shocked. You never mentioned this part of the plan. Because you would have objected, Jack replied. And we needed it ready. They watched as the first infected swarm ships began to behave erratically. Unlike the disruption frequency, which merely confused them, the virus attacked them from within. Ships began breaking formation, some turning on their own kind, others simply shutting down. What is happening to them? Asked the Astran High Commander, who had joined them on the bridge. The virus rewrites their genetic code, explained Tom. Makes them see each other as threats. It's basically turning the swarm against itself. An Astran official stepped forward, face dark with anger. This is monstrous. This is genocide. Ren interrupted flatly. The complete destruction of another species. Yes. The Astran stared at him in horror. This is why you called us. Ren continued, meeting his gaze without emotion. Because we could do what you couldn't. Over the next hour, they watched as the virus spread through the swarm fleet. Ship after ship failed or turned against its own kind. The combined human Astran fleet pressed the advantage, destroying the confused enemy vessels by the thousands. When it was clear they had the upper hand, Jack ordered a team to the surface to secure the Genesis chamber. The building had taken damage, but its core was intact. The genetic heritage of the Astran people was safe. As the last of the swarm ships in the system were hunted down, a solemn mood settled over the fleet. They had won, but the cost had been enormous. The Astrans looked at their human allies with a mixture of gratitude and fear, finally understanding what it meant to survive at any cost. Jack found Trell on the observation deck, staring at the planet below. You used a forbidden weapon, Trell said without turning. Biological warfare was banned across the galaxy millennia ago. Yes, Jack admitted. My people would never have agreed to it, which is why we didn't ask. Trell finally turned to face him. Do you feel anything? Remorse? Doubt? Jack considered the question carefully. I feel relief that it worked, that your people will survive. By committing genocide against another species. By doing what was necessary, Jack corrected him. The swarm would have consumed everything in its path, including Earth, eventually. For the first time, Trell saw something like emotion in Jack's eyes. Ruthlessness isn't about enjoying cruelty, Trell. It's about being willing to do terrible things when there are no good choices left. Down on the planet, Lisa and her team had finished securing the Genesis chamber. As they prepared to leave, Lisa noticed something strange in the swarm ship wreckage. A pattern, a structure that looked almost like a message. She called Tom. "I think you should see this. The swarm, I think they were trying to communicate with us at the end." "What were they saying?" Tom asked over the comm. Lisa stared at the pattern, feeling a chill. I think they were begging us to stop." The news spread quietly among the humans, but they agreed to keep it from the Astrans. Some knowledge was too heavy a burden for a civilization, just learning the cost of survival. 3 days after the battle at Astria Prime, the remaining swarm ships had been hunted down or driven from Astran space. Victory celebrations began on the surviving colonies, but they were subdued, tempered by the enormous losses. Nearly half of the Astran population was gone, their beautiful world scared by radiation and battle damage. On the Nemesis, Jack and his crew prepared to leave. They had loaded their payment, rare minerals and advanced technology, and were making final checks before departure. The mood was businesslike, without triumph or regret. Just another job completed. Jack was surprised when a large delegation of Astrans arrived to see them off. Leading them was the High Commander, flanked by Trell, and the Elder who had first supported bringing in the humans. "We have come to thank you," the High Commander said formally. "Our civilization survives because of your intervention." Jack nodded, accepting the gratitude without emotion. "You've paid us as agreed." "It's more than payment we wish to discuss," the Elder said, stepping forward. "Many of us expected to treat you with disgust after what was done. The methods used were," she hesitated, "beyond what we thought possible. Or necessary," added another official. "Yet here we stand," the Elder continued. "Alive. Our genetic heritage preserved. Our future, though damaged, still ahead of us." Trell looked at Jack with new understanding. "We've learned something about ourselves through this ordeal. And about humans." The humans stood silently, uncomfortable with the solemnity of the moment. Lisa fidgeted with a detonator. Marcus checked his data pad. Ren stared at the floor. "You were quarantined from the rest of the galaxy," the High Commander said. "Not because you are evil, as we once believed, but because you carry something the rest of us have evolved past, or thought we had. The capacity for necessary ruthlessness." Jack glanced at his crew, then back at the Astrans. "We did what you couldn't. That's all." "And that's everything," Trell replied. "You bore the burden of terrible choices so we could survive." The Elder stepped closer to Jack. "We would ask one more thing before you leave. Advice." "I'm not good at speeches," Jack warned her. "Yet we need to hear this," she insisted. "Tell us, how do we move forward from here? How do we rebuild without becoming like you?" Jack was silent for a long moment. His crew watched him curiously, never having seen their captain at a loss for words. "You don't want to be like us," he finally said. "The galaxy was right to quarantine humans. We're dangerous. We destroy things, sometimes including ourselves." He looked around at the Astran faces. "But we also survive. At any cost." He moved toward the ship, then stopped and turned back. "You have 2 choices now. Find someone to protect you. Hire us again, or others like us. Or learn to protect yourselves." "Become ruthless?" asked Trell, troubled. "No," Jack said. "Learn to be ruthless when necessary, and then set it aside. That's the trick we haven't mastered yet." He glanced at his own people. Being monsters when needed, and then stopping. As the humans boarded their ship, the news spread quickly beyond Astran space. Other civilizations heard the shocking story. The peaceful Astrans had hired quarantined humans to fight their war, and had won through methods that violated galactic conventions. Some reacted with horror, threatening to isolate the Astrans as well. Others, secretly facing their own threats, began sending quiet inquiries about how to contact these human mercenaries. The Nemesis left Astran space with its payment, its crew already looking toward the next job. As the stars streaked past in the viewport, Jack sat alone in his quarters, something unusual for him. He pulled out a small data crystal, a copy he had made of Lisa's discovery in the swarm wreckage. The patterns were clear now that Tom had analyzed them. The swarm had indeed been trying to communicate at the end, not just begging for mercy, but trying to explain. They hadn't been mindless devourers. They had been hungry, desperate refugees from some catastrophe in their own home system, unable to make themselves understood. Jack put the crystal away. Some truths were too heavy to share, even with his own crew. The Astrans would rebuild thinking they had fought off mindless monsters. His crew would move on to the next battle, the next paycheck. And Jack would carry alone the knowledge that, in saving one civilization, they had exterminated another that might have been saved through understanding. As the ship entered warp, Jack made a decision. Part of their payment had been Astran communication technology, more advanced than anything humans possessed. Perhaps next time, before the weapons came out, they could try another approach. Not because he was growing soft. Ruthlessness would always be necessary in a dangerous universe, but because the most ruthless humans understood that knowledge was power, and the power to communicate might sometimes be stronger than the power to destroy. The Nemesis disappeared into the darkness between stars, leaving behind a civilization forever changed by their encounter with humanity's darkest gift, the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive.